While I was away tending to my sick daughter, heavy machinery tore up my backyard. The Pinecrest HOA had decided to build a train track right through the middle of our family's three-generation farm, without even asking for permission, ruining my best crops in the process. But little did they know, I had just uncovered something that could turn everything they'd worked for upside down. Can you believe their fancy headquarters was actually sitting on my land? 5 years ago, I inherited my grandfather's 50-acre farm when he passed. This land used to be on the outskirts of a rural county, but over time, suburban development crept in. The Pinecrest community popped up over the last decade, full of McMansions and pristine lawns where cornfields once stretched. When they formed the HOA, they wasted no time trying to force me into joining. They claimed my eyesore of a farm was driving down property values. I stood my ground every time. This land's been in my family since 1943, it's working land, and I wasn't about to let anyone tell me how to run it. My grandfather built that red barn himself after coming home from World War II. He taught me everything I know about farming, and his legacy means more to me than any amount of money. The complaints started small, things like the noise from my tractor in the mornings, citations about my vegetable garden supposedly violating county ordinances, even demands to repaint my barn from its traditional red to something more appropriate. I ignored it all. I wasn't part of their HOA, and they had no control over my property. That is, until Olivia Brooks became the new president of the HOA. A polished, late-30s corporate type with a wardrobe full of sleek business suits. She saw my farm as nothing but an obstacle to her perfect suburban vision. During her campaign for HOA president, she openly vowed to deal with the farm problem and often brought along her right-hand man, Nathaniel Hayes, a retired corporate lawyer in his 60s, to handle the dirty work. Hayes would show up with friendly suggestions, trying to lowball me with offers from developers eager to buy my land. He'd leave brochures for retirement communities, implying that a man my age shouldn't still be working so hard. But this land isn't just property to me. It's my heritage, my livelihood, and my home. There was no amount of harassment that was going to make me sell. Last fall, I had to leave the state for 3 weeks to care for my daughter after her surgery. Before I left, I noticed some surveying equipment near my property line, but didn't think much of it. The HOA was always doing landscaping projects along their side of the boundary, so I figured it was just more of the same. Big mistake. I came back to find a literal train track running through my eastern field, cutting across my best land. They'd connected the HOA clubhouse to their new heritage center, right on my property. They had built a tourist train to ferry people between the two attractions, right through the heart of my farm. The tracks ran through my sweet corn patch, the one I'd been growing for the farmer's market. Nearly an acre of crops were wiped out, and in their place, they'd installed not only the tracks, but decorative lighting, benches, and signs explaining the historic significance of Pinecrest's agricultural past. The irony would have been almost funny if it weren't for the fact that they were destroying my livelihood. When I confronted Brooks at the HOA office, she pulled out paperwork claiming they had legal easement rights based on some obscure county ordinance. She said they had sent me proper notification, which I had somehow ignored. Apparently, the certified letter had been delivered while I was out of town. The train adds character to the neighborhood, she said, brushing her perfectly manicured hand through the air. It'll increase property values by at least 15%. You should be thanking us. When I pointed out that they had destroyed my crops, Hayes, who'd been standing off to the side, chimed in from a corner. We'll compensate you for the market value of the corn, he said. Can't be more than a few $100s, he added, sliding a check across the table. One that wouldn't even cover my seed costs, let alone the lost revenue. I immediately called my lawyer, Ethan, who confirmed my worst fears. Their permits were based on falsified documents. They had manipulated old property maps and rushed the construction through while I was away. But undoing this legally would be a lengthy, expensive battle. They're counting on you not having the resources to fight this, Ethan said. It's a common tactic with these aggressive HOAs. They know the legal system favors the people with deep pockets. That night, as I stood on my porch watching that ridiculous train making its first test run through my field, I felt completely violated. The red and white cars gleamed in the setting sun as they rolled over what should have been my harvest. How many more battles would I have to fight just to keep what was rightfully mine? There had to be a better way to fight back. That's when I started digging through my grandfather's old records in the metal filing cabinets in the barn. Grandpa was always meticulous about keeping track of everything related to our land. He'd fought off developers in the 70s and learned the hard way to keep impeccable records. I spent hours going through yellow deeds, 1940s survey maps, and correspondence with the county. At the back of one drawer, I found a folder labeled Northeast Corner Dispute 1968 that caught my eye. Inside was a detailed surveyor's map with handwritten notes from my grandfather. As I studied it under the lamp at his old desk, I stumbled upon something incredible. The small parcel where the HOA had built their office, the very headquarters where Brooks had waged her war against me, wasn't actually part of the original development plot. It had been mistakenly marked as part of the development back in the day, but in reality, that quarter acre belonged to our farm. Grandpa had noticed the error when the development first started, but it wasn't worth pursuing back then since the land was just a wooded corner. The documents showed that when he allowed an easement for county water lines in 1968, the surveyor had messed up the property line. The developers had used those incorrect measurements, but the original deeds told a different story. I called Ethan first thing in the morning and sent him scans of everything I found. He spent 3 days digging into county records and comparing them with my grandfather's documentation. "I can hardly believe this," Ethan said, excitement evident in his voice when he called me back. "Your grandfather's records check out," he confirmed. Through a legal loophole when the development was first approved, that land was never properly transferred. According to county records, that parcel still legally belongs to your family's farm. "So, I actually own their headquarters?" I asked, feeling a bit stunned, my mind racing with what this could mean. "According to these records, yes," he replied. "They've been operating on your land for 7 years without even realizing it. The HOA built their office back in 2018, but they never bothered to do a full title search to check the original farm boundaries. Can we prove it for sure?" I asked, trying not to get too excited. "Yes, but we'll need to file for a corrected survey with the county and formally establish your ownership. It'll take some paperwork and filing fees, and we'll need to keep this quiet until it's all official," he added. A plan began to take shape in my mind, one that could either resolve this whole situation or make it worse than ever. But either way, I was done being pushed around. "Ethan," I said, feeling a surge of determination, "let's keep this between us for now. I need time to figure out how to approach this." After hanging up, I looked out the window, watching the train run another test through my field. Instead of my usual anger, something else settled in me, a calm certainty that I finally had some leverage. That night, sleep was a struggle. I couldn't stop thinking about what my grandfather would have done if he were here. He wasn't the vengeful type, but he had a strong sense of justice and a deep respect for the community. The HOA, on the other hand, had no respect for either. They trampled on my rights, destroyed my crops, and treated me like some nuisance to be gotten rid of. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. It was a gamble, but sometimes you have to risk everything to protect what's important. If this worked out, it wouldn't just fix my train problem. It could turn this whole mess into something positive. The next morning, I was out inspecting the damage to my eastern field when I saw Brooks walking toward me, her tailored navy suit a sharp contrast to the farm around us, with Hayes following close behind. The red and white train cars were parked on the tracks behind them, a garish scar on my property. "Mr. Carter," she called, her heels sinking slightly into the soft dirt. "We need to talk about the landscaping around these tracks. These crops are too close to our attraction," she continued. "We'll need at least a 20-foot buffer zone on each side." I stood firm, wearing my grandfather's old faded overalls, the same ones he'd worn while working this land for decades. The contrast between us couldn't have been more obvious. Her designer suit versus my work clothes, her corporate arrogance against my down-to-earth practicality. "This is private property," I said, my jaw tightening. "You never had the right to build anything here in the first place." Hayes stepped up, his face turning red. We have all the necessary permits. This train is going to happen, whether you like it or not." "Those permits were faked," I shot back. "My lawyers already confirmed it." For just a moment, Brooke's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Prove it, farmer," she sneered. "Take us to court if you want. We've got the resources to drag this out for years." "Do you?" I asked, gesturing toward the train behind her. "This is progress, Mr. Carter. Pinecrest is becoming a premier community. Your quaint little farm is holding back property values for everyone else. Why fight the inevitable?" Hayes chuckled. "Maybe you should just sell now while you still can, before we come up with more creative ways to use the land around you." As they turned to leave, Brooks tossed a parting shot over her shoulder. "We'll be running 6 trains a day starting next week. You might want to move those crops. Oh, and do something about that tractor noise in the mornings. Some of the residents have complained." I watched them walk away, completely unaware that they were standing on my land. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of the confrontation, proof of their trespassing that would come in handy down the line. "Enjoy your little victory while it lasts," I muttered, already setting my plan into motion. I had to be careful. Ethan helped me quietly file the paperwork to officially claim ownership of the office property. We kept everything under wraps, paying extra to expedite the process. "This kind of title correction usually takes months," Ethan warned me. "But I've pulled some strings with the county clerk. They'll push it through for us." While we waited for the paperwork to go through, I visited the Veterans Rebuilding America office downtown. It was a charity I'd supported for years, providing housing assistance and job training for homeless veterans. My grandfather had always made sure to donate a portion of our harvest to them every year, and I'd kept that tradition alive. Sophia Turner, the director, was surprised when I asked for a private meeting. "I have an unusual proposition," I said once we were in her office. I explained the whole situation, how the HOA had been harassing me, the train tracks, and my discovery about the office parcel. "If I were to donate a building to your organization, do you think you could make use of it?" I asked. Sophia's eyes widened in surprise. "Absolutely. We've been looking for new, administrative space for months. Our lease is up soon, and commercial rents downtown have gone through the roof." She leaned forward. "But are you sure about this? You could sell that land for a lot of money." "I'm not interested in the money," I said. "I want to honor my grandfather's legacy and do something that actually benefits the community, the real community, not just the property values." With Sophia on board, I reached out to Luke, a locksmith friend who had helped me with security after a series of break-ins years ago. He agreed to be available on short notice once the paperwork went through. The final step was to go over the HOA's bylaws, the very ones Brooks had thrown in my face so many times. I got a copy from a sympathetic neighbor and spent a whole evening reading through the dense legal language. In Section 12, Paragraph 7, I found exactly what I needed. The association must conduct all official business from its registered headquarters as listed with the county. Another clause stated that board meetings could only be held at alternative locations during emergencies lasting no more than 14 days. Each night that week, I stood on my porch watching the train go through my field. The anger fueled my determination. Each passing day brought me closer to turning the tables on them. I ordered a large custom banner and arranged for a photographer from the local paper to coincidentally pass by at just the right moment. When Ethan called to let me know the paperwork was processed, I felt a real sense of victory for the first time in months. "It's official," he said. "You're the rightful owner of that parcel. I've emailed the final documents, and the hard copies will be delivered tomorrow morning." I called up Sophia and Luke to finalize our plan for Saturday morning, knowing the HOA would be doing their monthly property inspections. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Ethan asked, giving me one last chance to back out. "Once we do this, there's no turning back." I thought about my grandfather and the 3 generations of my family who had worked this land, and how the HOA had acted so arrogantly, ignoring it all. "I've never been more sure of anything," I answered. That Saturday, I showed up at the HOA office at 6 a.m. before anyone else would be around. With my paperwork in hand and the sheriff's deputy I had arranged to be a witness, I met Luke, who immediately went to work changing all the locks on the building. "You're sure this is legal?" the deputy asked, double-checking the documents. "Yes, sir," I replied. "This building is on my property, and I'm exercising my rights as the legal owner." We posted the ownership documents and a notice of donation on every door. By 8 a.m., the Veterans Rebuilding America volunteers had arrived, and we put up big signs saying, "Future Home of Veterans Rebuilding America," with American flags and the charity's logo. Sophia arrived soon after, bringing a dozen volunteers, all veterans in their organization t-shirts, who immediately started measuring and discussing renovation plans right on the front lawn. Some had clipboards, others carried coffee and donuts, creating a lively, purposeful atmosphere. By 9 a.m., when Brooks usually showed up to start her weekend inspections, a small crowd of curious neighbors had gathered. The local newspaper had caught wind of the veterans' donation and sent not only a photographer, but a reporter too. When Brooks pulled up in her luxury SUV, her expression was one of sheer disbelief. She just sat there for a moment, staring at the building with her mouth slightly open. Then she stormed toward the entrance, only to find her key wouldn't work. When she spotted me standing with Sophia and the veterans, she charged over, her designer heels clicking angrily on the pavement. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she yelled, her perfectly composed demeanor cracking. "This is HOA property." I calmly handed her the certified documents. "Actually, Olivia, this land has always belonged to my family. Check the surveys. I've simply decided to donate it to a worthy cause." The sheriff's deputy stepped forward. "Ma'am, I've reviewed the paperwork. It all checks out." As her face turned pale, I couldn't resist adding, "Maybe next time you'll think twice before putting a train track on someone else's land." Brooke's face went from white to red as she frantically flipped through the documents. "This is impossible. There must be some mistake." A few minutes later, Hayes showed up, hurrying over to check the papers himself. "This can't be legal," he threatened. "We'll sue you into the ground." But I could see the panic in his eyes as he noticed the county seal on the documents. "You're welcome to try," I said. "But while you're at it, you might want to explain how you got those fraudulent permits for that train track cutting across my land. I'm sure the county commissioner would love to hear about it." The neighbors started murmuring among themselves, many of them seeing Brooks' tactics for the first time, and they had questions of their own. Grace, a neighbor who had always been sympathetic to my cause, stepped forward. "Is that true, Olivia? You falsified permits for the train." Brooks sputtered, trying to keep her composure. "It was for the good of the community. Property values cost us a fortune in HOA fees," interrupted Oliver, another resident. "That train project doubled our monthly dues." "And for what?" Another homeowner chimed in. "A tourist attraction none of us asked for." The reporter, capturing every word, began asking Brooks tough questions about the train permits and why the HOA hadn't bothered to verify property boundaries before building their headquarters. "No comment," Brooks kept repeating, but her expression told a different story. Hayes pulled Brooks aside, whispering urgently as the situation began to spiral out of control. She kept glancing at me, a mix of rage and disbelief in her eyes. Meanwhile, Sophia was introducing the veterans to the neighbors, explaining their mission and how the building would help them expand their services. The atmosphere among the residents shifted from confusion to genuine interest, and some even started offering support. "We'll be offering job training programs," Sophia explained to the group, "and our veteran support groups will be meeting here weekly." "My son served in Afghanistan," one neighbor mentioned. "Is this program open to all veterans?" "Absolutely," Sophia replied. "We're here to help every veteran in need." By afternoon, Brooks had called an emergency HOA meeting at one of the board members' houses, since they no longer had an office. I wasn't invited, of course, but Grace texted me updates. "Total chaos," her first message said. "Half the board is threatening to quit." Her next message was even more revealing. "They're going over the financials now. Looks like Brooks spent HOA reserve funds on that train without full board approval." The local evening news ran a story about the battle between the farmer and the HOA, complete with footage of the veterans happily accepting their new building. The report raised uncomfortable questions about the HOA's practices and highlighted how the train project had been pushed through without the proper permits. That night, my phone was ringing off the hook with calls from neighbors I'd barely spoken to before. Some apologized for not standing up to the HOA sooner. Others asked about the veterans' charity. A few even offered to help fix my damaged field. The online comment section of the news story was flooded with support for me standing up to the HOA. About time someone stood up to these mini-dictators, one comment read. God bless our veterans, said another. By Sunday morning, an emergency petition was circulating among Pinecrest residents, calling for Brooks' resignation and a full audit of the HOA's finances. Hayes was nowhere to be found, likely trying to distance himself from the growing scandal. As I walked along my property line that evening, neighbors waved or called out greetings, something that rarely happened before. The train sat idle, no test run scheduled, as the HOA scrambled to fix the mess they'd created. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe freely on my own land. 3 days later, I got a call from Grace, who introduced herself as the HOA's newly appointed interim president. The board voted to remove Brooks last night, she said. We've reviewed everything. And, well, we owe you an apology, Mr. Carter. What the previous administration did was inexcusable. I let the words sink in, savoring the moment. I appreciate that, Grace. She went on, we'd like to meet with you to discuss a way forward that works for everyone. She proposed a compromise. The HOA would dismantle the train track and restore my property to its original condition, covering all the costs. In exchange, they asked if the Veterans Organization would consider leasing a part of the building back to the HOA for essential meetings. We're not asking for much space, Grace said. Just enough for our monthly meetings and a small office to store the records. I talked it over with Sophia, and she saw an opportunity. We could lease it out to them, use the rent to help fund our programs, she suggested, and maybe get a few of the Pinecrest residents involved as volunteers. Veterans need more than services. They need a sense of community. When we sat down with the new HOA board at Grace's house, I laid out my terms. First, I needed a formal agreement that my farm would never fall under the HOA's rules. Second, I wanted a binding agreement that the natural boundary between my land and Pinecrest would be designated as a heritage agricultural zone, meaning it couldn't be developed or encroached upon. Lastly, the HOA would match every dollar of rent they paid with an equal donation to Veterans Rebuilding America. Grace turned to her fellow board members, who nodded in approval. Those terms are fair, she said, extending her hand. We want to be good neighbors, Mr. Carter. An HOA should be about building community, not tearing it apart. The agreement was drawn up by Ethan and signed the following week. Within days, crews started removing the train tracks from my field. The HOA didn't just fix the damaged soil. They paid me a fair price for the crops I'd lost. By the end of the month, the veterans had moved into their new headquarters. The HOA took a small conference room and office at the back of the building. Sophia told me that a few Pinecrest residents had already signed up to volunteer. Then, as spring arrived, something unexpected happened. A group of Pinecrest residents approached me with the idea of starting a community garden on the border of our properties. Grace suggested we involve the veterans, making it part of their rehabilitation program. Many of our vets find gardening therapeutic, Sophia explained. Plus, it'd give them some skills they could use for work later on. We broke ground in April, and to my surprise, 20 neighbors showed up, all with shovels and seedlings, ready to get to work. Some brought food to share, while others brought their kids, eager to learn about growing their own food. By summer, the garden was thriving. There were flowers and vegetables growing side by side, with both veterans and residents working together. My grandfather's farm was thriving once again. The eastern field, now restored, was producing more crops than it had in years. Each harvest, I set aside some of the produce for the veterans' food pantry, a tradition I know my grandfather would have been proud of. Sometimes, I still see Brooks driving slowly by, glaring at the Veterans Rebuilding America sign where her office used to be. I heard she moved to a condo downtown, no HOA to deal with. Hayes resigned from the board, apparently worried about the legal fallout from his involvement in the false permits. Last I heard, the State Bar Association was looking into his conduct. As for the train tracks, parts of them were donated to the local children's museum, where they turned it into an interactive exhibit about agriculture and transportation. Ironically, it's now teaching kids about farming, something the HOA had tried so hard to wipe out from our community. It turns out, standing your ground isn't always about protecting what you own. Sometimes it's about reminding people what community really means. It's not about property values or having everything look perfect. It's about respect, honesty, and looking out for one another. The new HOA board understand that now. They've updated their bylaws to require more transparency and input from homeowners on big projects. They've lowered the monthly dues to a more reasonable amount, and their focus has shifted from cosmetic upgrades to addressing actual community needs. Just last week, Grace asked if I'd considered joining their Community Relations Committee as an advisory member. "We need your perspective," she said, "to make sure we never lose sight of what truly matters." I agreed, but only if our meetings included cookies made from my grandmother's recipe. Some traditions, after all, are worth keeping. As for me, I sleep better these days, knowing that my grandfather's legacy isn't just surviving, it's stronger than ever. His farm has become the heart of a real community. The fence between my land and Pinecrest still stands, but now the gates swing open both ways. Sometimes, fighting back doesn't just protect your land. It builds something better in its place. And that's a harvest worth waiting for. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and like.